This video is brought to you by Devout Decals, makers of reusable Catholic art for your home altar, your bedroom, and your home classroom.
You may have heard that there's a bit of a coronation in the news. I suggest watching that, even if you are not a fan of monarchies. After all, when is the last time you managed to watch such an event, which will reportedly involve a union of church and state, unlike things we typically see in the modern world? This got me to thinking. I very nearly brought to you today St. Thomas Aquinas' famous work De Regno, but that book is pretty large, actually. Larger than I usually like to do for weekends, especially dry material like this. So instead, I decided to turn to St. Robert Bellarmine, who is often credited, in a hilarious way, with saying that democracy is the greatest thing ever, or something, apparently being credited with endorsing the American Revolution or some such silliness when he didn't do that. He here gives us his philosophy on his famous political treatise on civil government. It comes from a larger work of his. It's actually not a very long piece at all. He has a different kind of point that he's making, which is that all forms of government come from God. All desire to be governed comes from God, and what makes government good or not is its adherence to the law of God. He was a monarchist through and through, though. That cannot be mistaken, which is one of the reasons why I always found the attempts to credit him with influencing the American Revolution to be a peculiar at best. But that having been said, here is St. Robert Bellarmine in his treatise on civil government. It's not the lightest reading ever. It reminds me a lot of some stuff I read in grad school for my PhD. So, anyway, St. Robert Bellarmine. The fourth argument is taken from the efficient cause, for it is certain that political power is of God, from whom proceeds nothing that is not good and lawful. St. Augustine proves this, for the wisdom of God proclaims, "By me kings reign," and below, "By me princes rule," and "The God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom and strength," etc. And "Thy dwelling shall be with cattle and with wild beasts, and thou shalt eat grass as an ox, and shall be wet with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth over the kingdom of men, and give it to whomsoever he will." But in this place other matters should be noted. First, political power considered in general, not descending in particular to monarchy, aristocracy, or democracy, comes directly from God alone. For this follows of necessity from the nature of man, since that nature comes from him who made it. Besides, this power derives from the natural law, since it does not depend upon the consent of men. For willing or unwilling, they must be ruled over by someone, unless they wish the human race to perish, which is against a primary instinct of nature. But natural law is divine law. Therefore, government was instituted by divine law. And this seems to be the correct meaning of St. Paul when he says, "He that resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God." Note, secondly, that this power resides as in its subject immediately in the whole state, for this power is by divine law. But divine law gives this power to no particular man. Therefore, divine law gives this power to the collected body. Furthermore, in the absence of positive law, there is no good reason why, in a multitude of equals, one rather than another should dominate. Therefore, power belongs to the collected body. Finally, human society ought to be a perfect state. Therefore, it should have the power to preserve itself, hence to punish the disturbers of the peace, etc. Note, in the third place, that by the same natural law this power is delegated by the multitude to one or several, for the state cannot of itself exercise this power. Therefore, it is held to delegate it to some individual, or to several, and this authority of rulers, considered thus in general, is both by natural law and by divine law, nor could the entire human race assembled together decree the opposite, that is, that there should be neither rulers nor leaders. Note in the fourth place that individual forms of government in specific instances derive from the law of nations, not from the natural law, for, as is evident, it depends on the consent of the people to decide whether kings or consuls or other magistrates are to be established in authority over them. And if there can be legitimate cause, the people can change a kingdom into an aristocracy, or an aristocracy into a democracy, and vice versa, as we read was done in Rome. Note in the fifth place that it follows from what has been said that this power in specific instances comes indeed from God, but through the medium of human wisdom and choice. as do all other things which pertain to the law of nations. For the law of nations is a sort of conclusion drawn from the natural law by human reason, from which are inferred two differences between the political and ecclesiastical power. One in view of the subject, for political power resides in the people, and ecclesiastical power in the individual, as it were immediately in the subject of whom it devolves. The other difference is in view of the efficient cause, because political power considered in general is by divine law, but considered in particular it is by the law of nations. Ecclesiastical power, however, considered from every point of view, is by divine law, and immediately from God. On the basis of these proofs, in answer to the fourth argument of the Anabaptists, I maintain that by their argument they prove their point only in respect to particular forms of government, not to political power in general. But we wish in this place to establish the principle of political power in general, not any particular form of government. I add, secondly, that very often governments are both just and unjust, of God and not of God. For on the part of those who hold and usurp authority, governments are thievish and unjust, hence not from God. Yet on the part of divine providence, which makes use of the evil intent of men and directs it either to the punishment of sin or to some other good end, or to the reward of good deeds, governments are just and lawful. For God, by an admirable decree of his providence, sometimes deprives some of power and bestows it upon others in such wise that he who falls from power over the kingdom falls justly. And God himself in his own time will inflict most just punishments for that invasion. For God gave the possession of Palestine to the sons of Israel for a far different reason from that from which he afterwards gave it to Salmanasar or Nebuchadnezzar, inasmuch as the sons of Israel, under the leadership of Joshua, fought with praiseworthy obedience against the people of Palestine, and when many of these latter had been slain in battle, appropriated their lands, whereas Salmanasar and Nebuchadnezzar, by a most wicked sacrilege, led into captivity the people of God. For in this they sought to follow not the divine command, but their own wicked desire. Yet even though they were ignorant of it, God made use of them for that end, which, most justly, he willed to be attained. St. Augustine and Hugh of St. Victor explain this matter accurately, nor is the testimony of the Scriptures wanting. For in Isaiah we read as follows, quote, "The Assyrian is the rod and the staff of my anger. My indignation is in their hands. I will send him to a deceitful nation, and I will give him a charge against the people of my wrath, to take away the spoils, and to lay hold on the prey, and to tread them down like the mitre on the street. But he shall not make it so, and his heart shall not think so." In this place God speaks of Salmanasar and Sennacherib, who with evil intent seized the lands of Israel. Yet God, without their knowledge, made use of their deeds to punish the Israelites. Thus Isaiah, quote, "Thus saith the Lord to my anointed Cyrus, whose right hand I have taken hold of, to subdue nations before his face, and to turn back the kings, and open the doors before him, and the gates shall not be shut. I will go before thee, and I will humble the great ones of the earth. I will break in pieces the gates of brass, and will burst the bars of iron. And I will give thee hidden treasures, and the concealed riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I am the Lord, who call thee by thy name, the God of Israel. For the sake of my servant Jacob, and Israel my chosen, I have even called thee by thy name. I have made a likeness of thee, and thou hast not known me." From this passage it appears that Cyrus had obtained a kingdom for himself through his desire for domination, and not for the sake of God's service, and yet God aided him and gave him the kingdom he was seeking, that he himself might liberate the people of Israel from the Babylonian captivity. Jeremiah, quote, "I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant. Moreover also the beasts of the field I have given him to serve him. And all nations shall serve him, and his son's son, till the time come for his land and himself, and many nations and great kings shall serve him. But the nations and the kingdoms will not serve Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon. And whosoever will not bend his neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, I will visit upon that nation with the sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, saith the Lord. And yet who doubts that Nebuchadnezzar subdued so many kingdoms with bad intent?" Ezekiel also says, "Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, hath made his army to undergo hard service against Tyre. There hath been no reward given him or his army for Tyre, for the service that he rendered me against it." And below, "I have given him the land of Egypt, because he hath labored for me, saith the Lord God." In like manner, the Romans sought empire not for the sake of God, but through a desire for worldly glory, as St. Augustine shows at great length in the City of God. Yet God gave them supreme rule, not only that he might reward them for their good works in the moral order, as St. Augustine likewise shows in the City of God, but also that through the union of all the nations under one government, the way might be prepared for the preaching of the gospel, as St. Leo says in his first sermon for the feast of Saints Peter and Paul. And add, moreover, that even if at the beginning those who founded kingdoms were usurpers for the most part, yet by the passing of time either they or their successors became lawful rulers of these kingdoms, since the people gradually gave their consent. In this way the kingdom of France is now lawful, in the opinion of all, though in the beginning the Franks unjustly occupied Gaul. And the same may be said of the kingdom of Spain, which began with the invasion of the Goths, of the kingdom of England, which began with the unjust occupation of the Anglo-Saxons, and of this very Roman Empire, which was founded by Julius Caesar, the oppressor of his country, which nevertheless afterward became lawful to such a degree that our Lord said, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's," etc. And those are the words of St. Robert Bellarmine. And I have no doubt that today I will see, probably in my comments, someone mentioning that they believe the current family running the monarchy in the United Kingdom are illegitimate. I have seen that before. I don't have an opinion on that, partially because, as St. Robert Bellarmine reminds us here, that over time the people accepted them and they became legitimate. That almost every empire and country you can name had questionable foundations and questionable foundings, but over time the people came to accept the order of things. Now, that may not be a good excuse for some forms of government, obviously, but for the current things going on, especially for things that I don't find be remotely useful debating, this is probably fine. I'm curious what you thought of this, though. God using wicked rulers to make a point. We could use this to really contemplate the state of the church today. The, current crop of rulers of the church aren't exactly model prelates. Are the laity being punished? I have often posited that we are. It's one of the reasons I'm not a set of a contest. It seems like too easy of an out from that for me. I'm curious what you think of St. Robert Bellarmine's story here, what his explanation is for the role of, government and God ordaining such things in the material world and for what ends. So let me know in the comments what you thought of this. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help, as does sharing this on social media. That helps a lot too. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.